August of 1983. Novoscherkassk prison, a solitary confinement cell for those condemned to death, where the air is thick with dampness and an animal fear. On the hard wooden sleeping planks sits a woman. If you were to see her now, you would give her 80 years. Gray, tangled hair, deep wrinkles, trembling hands, a mad stare fixed on a single point. She rocks herself back and forth and whispers the same names over and over. The names of the men who ran the Soviet Union. Names that, just mentioning them, would make ministers turn pale. But in reality, she is only 56 years old. She waits. Every time heavy footsteps and the sound of the convoy echo in the corridor, she flinches and rushes to the heavy iron door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. She firmly believes that any moment now, the bolt will clang, the door will swing open, and the prison warden, unable to meet her eyes, will say, "There's been a mistake, Bella Naumovna. Pack your things. Sergei Fyodorovich has ordered your release. Moscow itself has interceded for you." She waits for salvation, but she does not know, or refuses to believe, that Sergei Fyodorovich Medunov, the all-powerful master of the Krasnodar region, her patron and earthly god, has already been removed from his post and walks under the sword of Damocles himself. And Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev, whom she fed for years with the finest black caviar and vintage cognac, has been lying in the mausoleum by the Kremlin wall for a year now. This woman is Bella Borodkina. The people called her Iron Bella, the mistress of Gelendzhik, the queen of Soviet public catering. A woman who had so much money, she could have bought this grim prison fortress, along with all the guards, prosecutors, and judges. But money no longer works here. In a few hours, they will come for her, not to free her and take her to a lavish restaurant, but to take her to a damp execution cellar. The prosecutor will dryly read the verdict, the supreme measure of punishment, and a shot will ring out, placing a period at the end of the story of the most powerful thief in the Soviet Union. She will become the only woman in the late USSR officially executed by firing squad for economic crimes. For theft, how did a simple waitress, who started out washing dishes, manage to climb to the very peak of the Soviet elite? Why were even crowned thieves-in-law afraid of her? And what terrible secret did she carry with her into the grave, never betraying her Kremlin patrons, even though she could have taken half the party central committee down with her? Today, we will tell the story of absolute power and absolute downfall. The story of a woman who was convinced she had bought God himself with stacks of 100 ruble notes. Friends, investigations like this require enormous work with archives, piecing the picture together bit by bit. YouTube algorithms often hide this kind of content about the dark side of the USSR and crime. So right now, I am asking you to support our channel. It's very simple. Hit the subscribe button and like this video. It will take you a second, but it helps us spread the truth and make new episodes. Thank you so much. Now let's travel to sunny Gelendzhik in the 1970s to understand the scale of Bella's persona and why she was called the Queen. We need to transport ourselves to 1974. Gelendzhik, the jewel of the Black Sea. Summer, heat that melts the asphalt. Thousands of Soviet citizens, vacationing as savages, bake on overcrowded beaches where you couldn't squeeze an apple in. They chew boiled corn, stand in kilometer-long lines for warm, watered-down beer from yellow barrels, and count their kopecks until payday. This is the ordinary USSR, the USSR of total scarcity, queues, and modesty. But there is another Gelendzhik. Closed, elite, inaccessible to the ordinary engineer or teacher. And this world has an absolute mistress. Bella Borodkina at that time holds the position of manager of the city's restaurant and canteen. Trust. Sounds boring, like some ordinary bureaucratic post? Far from it. In a resort city where food and leisure are the main currency, this position wields influence equal to, or even greater than, the mayor's. She is the one who decides who today will eat fresh shashlik made from prime-cut meat, and who will choke on yesterday's patty made of bread and gristle. She decides who gets poured genuine Armenian cognac aged 20 years and who gets tinted alcohol in a faceted glass. Her workday doesn't begin in a stuffy office with paperwork. It begins in the city's best beauty salon. Personal hairdresser, manicurist, masseuse. They all work only for her. Bella always looks impeccable, defiantly luxurious for a Soviet person. Imported suits, tailored for her. Shoes impossible to find in stores, and fur coats. Even in 40-degree Celsius heat, she might drape a luxurious silver fox manto over her shoulders, wearing it like a royal mantle. The amount of gold and diamonds on her was blinding. Locals whispered, their eyes following her car. There goes Bella. When her white Volga, with city administration license plates, drove along the embankment, traffic police officers would snap to attention and salute, as if an army general were passing by. She created a genuine oasis of wild capitalism in a Soviet city. In her restaurants, you could get absolutely everything. Black caviar by the kilogram, smoked fish fillets, imported Marlboro cigarettes, French Chanel perfume, Japanese electronics, but of course not for everyone. The Soviet elite partied in her establishments. Cosmonauts, famous people's artists, ministers, generals, directors of major factories. They say even Vladimir Vysotsky himself, visiting Gelendzhik with his Marina Vladi, considered it his duty to stop by Bella's and pay his respects, and she knew how to receive guests. Legends about her banquets traveled from Brest to Vladivostok. If an important person from Moscow or Krasnodar arrived in town, a feast was laid out with a grandeur that even Russian czars never dreamed of. Tables groaned under delicacies. Champagne flowed like a river. The waitress girls serving these banquets were personally selected by Bella. The most beautiful, the quickest, and importantly, those who knew how to keep their mouths shut. Music played until dawn, catering to every whim of the guests. And of course, at the end of the evening, no one asked for the check. "For our dear guests, it's on the house," Bella would say with a regal smile, seeing drunken ministers off to their cars. Of course, the phrase "on the house" actually meant at the expense of the state, and at the expense of thousands of ordinary customers who were shamelessly short-weighted and overcharged in neighboring canteens to pay for this banquet of life. She was tough, even cruel. Her subordinates were terrified of her, trembling wrecks. City rumors had it that one look from Bella could get a person fired. Once, she noticed a young waitress had gone out to serve guests in a slightly wrinkled apron. Bella didn't reprimand her in the office. She walked up to the girl right there in the dining hall, tore the apron off her, and slapped her across the face in front of everyone. "Eyes there, Tios, you'll be cleaning public toilets for me if you don't learn to look like a human being," she screamed throughout the restaurant. And no one peeped. No one stood up for her. No one ran to complain to the trade union, because everyone knew. Bella's word is law. She could not just fire you with a black mark, closing the door to work in the entire region. She could have you imprisoned. She had the prosecutor, the police chief, and the judges in her pocket. She could destroy any little person with a snap of her manicured fingers. Friends, imagine yourself in the place of those people. You work in a system where the boss is a real tyrant who can hit or humiliate you at any moment. Yet she pays you huge under-the-table sums, money you could never earn honestly working at a factory. Every cook, every cafeteria cashier under her had their own Jiguli car and apartment. Would you endure humiliation for wealth? Or is pride more important? Write honestly in the comments what you would have done. I'm very interested to know your opinion. But behind this reinforced concrete facade of an iron lady, behind this image of an unapproachable queen, hid a cunning, resourceful, and deeply traumatized girl who, once, many years ago, kneeling in the dirt, made herself a terrible vow. "I will never be poor again. I will never be hungry again. I will tear out throats, but I will claw my way to the top." Where did she come from? She wasn't born into a family of party bigwigs. She wasn't promoted by influential fathers. She made herself, passing through hell. Bella Naumovna Borodkina, ne Berta Naumovna Korol, was born in 1927 in the city of Belaya Tserkov in Ukraine. Her childhood was not pioneer camps and ice cream. Her childhood was hunger, the real, terrible famine of the 1930s, when people ate goosefoot and tree bark to survive. Then the war, evacuation, the death of loved ones. Total, hopeless poverty. She saw people die for a crust of stale bread, and that animal fear of hunger etched itself into her DNA, became her primary driving force. After the war, she ended up in Gelendzhik, young, beautiful, with burning eyes, but absolutely no education, no profession, no connections. What job could such a girl get in a post-war resort town? Only in the service sector. She started at the very bottom, as a simple cafeteria cashier, pouring beer, selling liver pies, wiping sticky tables. It was then, standing behind the counter of a grimy dive bar, watching tired people count their kopecks, that she understood the great cynical truth of Soviet life, which became her motto: cheat or die. In the USSR, scarcity was a fact of life. Food at state prices wasn't available to everyone, and the one who sat at the distribution point of these products, who held the knife and the scales, that person was the true king. Bella learned instantly. She grasped the criminal science on the fly, how to dilute thick village sour cream with kefir so no one noticed the substitution, and pocket the difference? Easy. How to underpour just 5 grams of cognac into each shot glass, so that by evening you had accumulated a whole extra bottle you could sell off the books? Elementary. How to write off a ton of fresh meat as shrinkage and wastage, and then sell it to a familiar shashlik vendor for 3 times the price? This was the ABCs of public catering, and Bella aced the exam. But Bella was different from thousands of other thieving cafeteria cashiers who dragged bags of sausage home. She had scale. She didn't want to steal small time just to be fed. She wanted to build a system. She wanted power. She married an old sea captain. Was it a love match? Of course not. It was pure calculation. Her husband died fairly quickly, leaving her a good house and, crucially, the status of a respected man's widow, which meant a great deal in those days. But she took the surname Borodkina from her second husband, who also didn't last long. She was like a black widow spider, using men as stepping stones, climbing higher and higher. After getting a correspondence degree in trade, she began to claw her way up the career ladder with the tenacity of a tank. Director of a small cafe, director of a prestigious restaurant, and finally, in 1974, the summit. Manager of the Restaurant and Canteen Trust. She wasn't appointed to this position just for her beautiful eyes or her talent for stealing. Bella possessed a unique diplomatic gift. She knew how to make friends. In the Soviet understanding, making friends meant giving expensive gifts to the right people at the right time. She knew the birthdays of all the secretaries of the city party committee, their wives, children, and mistresses. She knew exactly what cognac the police chief liked and what French perfume the prosecutor's wife dreamed of receiving. She became indispensable. Need an urgent banquet organized for a foreign delegation from Bulgaria? Call Bella. She'll do it top class. Need to feed an angry inspector from Moscow until he's drunk, mellow, and forgets about the audit? Call Bella. She knows how to charm. Need to get a scarce German Madonna porcelain dinner set for the daughter of the district. Committee secretary's wedding? Bella will get it from under the ground. In the early 70s, a new master arrived in the Krasnodar region. Sergei Fyodorovich Medunov, a man like a granite block, a close personal friend of Brezhnev himself. Medunov loved grandeur. He wanted to turn Sochi and Gelendzhik into a showcase of victorious socialism, a Soviet Riviera. He needed people who knew how to make things beautiful, who could create an image of abundance. And Bella entered his orbit. With her animal instinct, she understood. Here it is, her golden ticket. If she could please Medunov, if she could become his purse, his loyal servant, his minister of hospitality, everything would be permitted to her. Any law would cease to exist for her. Thus began the great and terrible symbiosis of power and crime, the era of Medanov's kingdom and Bella's reign. But for this dizzying success, a price had to be paid. And she didn't pay with her own money. She paid with the money of ordinary Soviet people, constructing a gigantic pyramid of theft. Within her trust, a brutal system of tribute was established, resembling a feudal order. Every canteen director, every cafe manager, every beachside buffet cashier had to pay her monthly tribute directly into her hands. "I have to carry it up," Bella would say, accepting thick envelopes stuffed with banknotes. And it was the plain truth. Part of the money settled in her bottomless pockets, turning into furs, crystal, and diamonds. But the lion's share went higher, to Krasnodar. And from there, they say, suitcases of money traveled straight to Moscow. By the mid-70s, Bella felt immortal. She walked right along the edge of the abyss. But the height made her dizzy, and she never even looked down. In her restaurants, things started happening that were utterly beyond the pale, resembling a feast during the plague. They say that in the closed-off rooms for special guests, orgies and entertainments were held that would have made depraved Roman emperors envious. And at the same time, in the basements of canteens, under unsanitary conditions, they brewed illegal coffee from burnt sugar and fried shashlik from meat that, according to documents, didn't even exist. Bella thought she had caught God by the beard. But there was one thing she didn't know. In Moscow, in the gray, smoke-filled offices of the KGB, a thin file with the stamp "Secret" had already been opened on her. The Brezhnev era was drawing to a close. On the horizon loomed the ominous shadow of Yuri Andropov, who hated corruption, despised luxury, and personally had a score to settle with Comrade Medunov. And Bella Borodkina, with her diamonds and banquets, was the perfect, fat target to start a great war for succession. How to turn air into gold. Medieval alchemists pondered this question for centuries, but it wasn't science that found the answer. It was Soviet trade, and Bella Borodkina was the chief alchemist of this system. Many think she simply stole by dipping her hand into the cash register. No, that would have been too primitive and dangerous. Bella built a technological process of theft that worked like a Swiss watch. It was the magic of public catering, where the law of conservation of mass did not apply. Products vanished in one place and appeared in another, but already transformed into stacks of money. Let's step into the kitchen of an ordinary Soviet canteen in Gelendzhik in the late 70s. Heat, the smell of rancid oil, the clatter of dishes. What do we see? Cauldrons, cooks in dirty smocks, lines of vacationers. What did Bella see? She saw a gold mine. The foundation of her empire was economy, but not the economy the party preached. It was the economy of theft. The main source of super profit was alcohol. Gelendzhik, a resort. People come to rest, to relax. Cognac and wine flowed in rivers, but what the tourists drank had only a very distant relation to the labels on the bottles. Bella's scheme was brilliant in its simplicity and audacity. Take the cheapest industrial alcohol or cheap Tsinandali wine, which cost next to nothing. Add burnt sugar for color, that famous caramel, a little vanilla, sometimes tea leaves. This infernal mixture was poured into bottles that previously held expensive Armenian cognac. The cork was sealed by makeshift methods. Bella had an entire underground workshop dedicated solely to corks and labels. The production cost of such a bottle was 1 ruble. It was sold in the restaurant for 10, sometimes even 20 rubles. 1,000% profit, and nobody complained. Tourists, languid from the southern sun, drank, got drunk, and praised the authentic Caucasian flavor. And if anyone did notice something off, getting into a fight with Bella's staff was more trouble than it was worth. The waiters were strictly instructed: throw the dissatisfied out, threaten them with the police for hooliganism. The second source of income, meat. In the USSR, meat was scarce, a currency. In canteens, regulations required a certain amount of beef and pork in each cutlet. But in Bella's empire, regulations existed only on paper for inspections. In reality, meat was replaced with water-soaked bread, semolina, and huge amounts of onion and garlic to mask the smell of anything less than fresh. Where did the saved meat go? It went into shashlik. Shashlik on the embankment is the symbol of resort happiness, and it was sold not at the state price of kopecks, but at commercial market prices. Every kilogram of meat stolen from a schoolchild's or a worker's canteen pot turned into 10 portions of elite shashlik for well-heeled vacationers. This was double-entry bookkeeping. The state paid for food supplies for the people, and Bella sold that same food back to those people at triple the price. Friends, I have a question for you. Surely many of you or your parents vacationed at Soviet resorts. Do you remember the taste of those canteen patties, which had more bread than meat, or the watered-down sour cream that ran like water? Write your memories of Soviet public catering in the comments. Did you feel cheated back then, or was it perceived as the norm of life? But the most cynical invention was the coffee business. Coffee was also scarce in the USSR. In Bella's restaurants, they served real coffee, but the only real thing about it was the smell. Waiters mixed coffee grounds left over from previous customers with burnt sugar and chicory, added a drop of fresh coffee for aroma, and served it as espresso. The profit on a single cup reached 500%. And sour cream. The famous trick of diluting sour cream with kefir, or even plain water with starch added for thickness. Bella controlled everything. She personally toured her establishments, but not to check the food quality. She was checking the revenue. Every restaurant director, every canteen manager, every buffet cashier knew their quota. They had to hand over a specific amount of cash to Bella at the end of the day. Failed to deliver? Fired. How you got that money was your problem. Short wait, underpour, dilute, bring in your own products. The main thing, give the mama her share. That's what they called her behind her back. Mama was strict, but fair in her own criminal understanding. If you paid regularly, she turned a blind eye to any theft. She provided the roof. Any inspection, whether it was the Sanitary Epidemiological Station or OBKHSS, the Department for Combating Theft of Socialist Property, would end up in Bella's office. A luxurious table would be set, thick envelopes presented, and the inspectors would leave, having signed documents stating no violations were found. The scale of the embezzlement was astronomical. According to modest estimates by the investigation that would come later, in just the last 2 years of her activity, Bella received bribes and kickbacks totaling over 500,000 rubles. Think about that number. The average salary of an engineer in the USSR was 120 to 150 rubles. A Volga car, the dream of every Soviet person, cost about 10,000 rubles, and that was with a waiting list. Bella earned several Volgas a month. Where did she put this money? You couldn't keep it in a Soviet bank. Questions would arise immediately. Spending such sums legally was also impossible, so the money turned into treasure. Bella lived in a veritable palace by Soviet standards. Her home was crammed with antiques, crystal, hand-woven carpets, but the main wealth wasn't kept on shelves. It was kept in jars. Ordinary 3-liter glass jars, sealed with metal lids, just like pickles. Only inside there were no preserves, but tight stacks of 100-ruble notes and jewelry. These jars were buried in the cellar, hidden in the attic, bricked up in the walls of relatives' homes. She swam in luxury, but this luxury was underground. She couldn't buy a yacht or a plane, so she invested in gold, furs, diamonds. Bribes were her main investment. She bought loyalty. She knew that as long as she paid upwards, no one would touch her. She was the system's wallet. District committee secretaries built their dachas with her money. Police chiefs drove cars bought with her gifts. She had bound everyone in mutual responsibility. But Bella had her finest hour, a moment of supreme triumph when she felt the equal of gods. These were the receptions for the country's top leadership. It wasn't just ordinary workers who loved to visit Gelendzhik, but party bosses too. And when the call came from the regional committee, he himself is coming, Bella would transform. He himself could be anyone from the Minister of Trade to a member of the Politburo. For such guests, an entire restaurant would be closed, security deployed. Bella would personally compose the menu, and it was not the menu of a Soviet canteen. It was sturgeon hot-smoked, caviar in silver buckets, game hunted in nature reserves, French cheeses flown in on special flights. She would greet the guests at the threshold herself, radiant in diamonds and a couture dress. She knew how to conduct small talk, knew the latest anecdotes, but only the permissible ones. She knew when to refill a glass, when to flatter. The party bigwigs adored her. Now there's a woman, there's a real manager. Learn how it's done, they'd tell their aides, slapping Bella on the shoulder. She felt her power over these aging, bloated men in gray suits. She saw how greedily they ate, how they drank for free, how permissiveness made them lose their human shape. And deep in her soul, she despised them. She considered them parasites that needed to be fed so they wouldn't bite. Eat, she would think, smiling her trademark smile. As long as you're eating from my hand, you're mine. She was so confident in her invulnerability that she lost all caution. She began to flaunt things that should never be flaunted. She openly wore jewelry worth more than 100 years of her official salary. She began to feel not just like a servant of the system, but its mistress. In the city, they called her the Shahina, and she liked that nickname. But every fairy tale has an end, and the end of Iron Bella's fairy tale was already standing on the threshold, in a gray raincoat, with a cold head. In 1980, Moscow saw the death of Alexei Kosygin, chairman of the Council of Ministers. Brezhnev's position weakened every day. Power was slowly flowing into the hands of the KGB. Andropov was preparing his strike. He needed a loud, showy trial to bring down Medanov's clan and show the people the party was fighting theft. A victim was needed. A bright, wealthy victim, hated by the people. And a better candidate than the overfed, gold-draped director of the canteen trust from Gelendzhik could not be found. But Bella did not know this yet. She continued to spin her schemes, seal her jars of money in the cellar, and slap waitresses. She was preparing for the new summer season of 1981, which promised to be record-breakingly profitable. She did not hear that in the quiet offices on Lubyanka Square. An order had already been signed to develop an operation under the code name Octopus. Octopus, tentacles stretching from Gelendzhik to Krasnodar, and from there to Moscow. And they decided to cut off these tentacles starting from the head. More precisely, from that bright head that so loved elaborate hairstyles and diamond hairpins. 1981. The echoes of the 1980 Olympics in Moscow had just faded. The country, having spent colossal sums on the sports festival, was beginning to tighten its belt. Stores were getting emptier, queues longer. But in Gelendzhik, the holiday never ended. Bella Borodkina continued to live in her illusory world, where champagne flowed like a river and laws were written only for the poor. She failed to notice the main change. In Moscow, a big war had begun. A war between two powerful agencies. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, headed by Brezhnev's friend Nikolai Shchelikov, and the KGB under Yuri Andropov. Andropov had long been gathering compromising material on the southern mafia. He needed to topple Sergei Medunov, the master of the Krasnodar region, to weaken the position of the aging Brezhnev. But attacking Medunov head-on was impossible. His protection was too powerful. He needed to find the weak link, that one brick whose removal would collapse the entire building. And that brick became Bella. She was too flashy, too arrogant, and too close to the master of Kuban. Bella's fatal mistake was her certainty that she knew all the important people by sight. But one day, a man she did not know walked into one of her restaurants. There is a legend, confirmed in part by case files, that the impetus for the first serious investigation was a complaint from an ordinary customer. Or not entirely ordinary. Picture it. Evening, an elite restaurant in Gelendzhik. A doorman at the entrance who only lets in regulars, or those who slip him a 5-ruble note. A modestly dressed man approaches the doors and asks for a table. The doorman, giving him a contemptuous once-over, rudely refuses. No room. Get lost, pal. This is special service. The man insists. Bella herself comes out at the commotion. She, glittering with diamonds, looks at the uninvited guest as if he were dirt under her feet. You were told, no room. This establishment isn't for your wallet. Go to the dumpling joint. She snaps and orders security to throw the insolent man out. Bella didn't know that this modest man was an employee of the prosecutor's office, or according to another version, an officer from the central KGB apparatus, on vacation incognito. And he was a man of principle. Insulted and humiliated, he didn't fight the bouncers. He returned to his hotel room and wrote a detailed report to Moscow, not about being denied a meal, but about the lawlessness in a state-run restaurant, the flourishing private enterprise, and the manager behaving like a feudal princess. This report landed on the right desk. At any other time, it would have been flushed down the toilet or forwarded to Medinov himself, who would have shared a laugh with Bella. But now, Andropov needed a pretext, and a pretext was found. The command was given to proceed. The operation was developed in the strictest secrecy. Local police knew nothing. Moscow understood that the entire Gelendzhik police force was fed from Bella's hand. A special team of operatives from the capital arrived in the city. They worked undercover, like in a spy movie. At first, they just observed. They went to her restaurants, recorded prices, taped conversations between waiters. They saw things that shocked them. In Bella's restaurants, they were openly showing pornographic films. Yes, you heard correctly. Video rooms were set up in the back rooms. A video cassette recorder in the early 80s USSR cost as much as a car and was a luxury item. Bella bought the equipment and the blueberry tapes from smugglers. They charged huge sums for viewing, 50 rubles per person. And the room was always packed. Party functionaries, tired from building communism, eagerly watched the pleasures of the capitalist world. For a Soviet court, distributing pornography was a serious charge, adding moral depravity to economic crimes. Having gathered enough evidence, the operatives decided to make the arrest. The arrest of Bella Borodkina resembled a scene from a Hollywood action film. Night. Black Volgas without license plates and a police van pull up to her luxurious mansion. Bella was not asleep. She was, as usual, counting the day's takings. When they started banging on the door, she wasn't even scared at first. She was angry. Who's there? Do you know whose house this is? I'll call the head of the police department right now, and he'll grind you to dust, she screamed through the door. But the door was broken down. Plainclothes men and armed soldiers burst into the foyer. Citizen Borodkina, you are under arrest. Bella's first reaction was predictable. She tried to buy them off, right there, in the foyer, in her robe and slippers. She offered the head of the operational team a bribe. She named a sum that would have stopped an ordinary Soviet person's heart. Guys, let's not make a circus. Take the money right here in the nightstand and go. Say I wasn't home. She sincerely did not understand why they wouldn't take it. Everyone always took it. Her whole life, everyone always took it. Why were these ones refusing? Maybe she didn't offer enough. Not enough? I'll give more. I'll give jewelry. Take it all. But the team leader silently put handcuffs on her. Only when the cold metal snapped shut on her wrists did it begin to dawn on Bella. This wasn't an ordinary inspection. This was the end. The search began, and this search entered the annals of Soviet criminal investigation. The operatives, who had seen it all, walked through Bella's house as if through the Hermitage Museum. The house was stuffed with things. Wardrobes were bursting with fur coats. They counted dozens: mink, Arctic fox, sable, some still with price tags on. She didn't wear them. She just owned them. Crystal chandeliers, hand-woven carpets stacked in piles, dinner services for 100 people, scarce Japanese stereo equipment, boxes of imported lingerie. It was Ali Baba's cave, only instead of 40 thieves, there was one elderly woman. But the most interesting part began when they started searching for money. Bella was silent, teeth clenched. She hoped they wouldn't find the main stash. The operatives tapped walls, pried up floors, and the hiding places began to reveal themselves one after another. Money was everywhere. Stacks of 100-ruble notes were stuffed into heating radiators. They were under mattresses. They were hidden in boxes of laundry detergent. But the main treasure was found in the cellar, among the rows of homemade preserves. Tomatoes, cucumbers, compotes stood ordinary 3-liter jars, sealed with metal lids. Only inside, there was no brine. The jars were tightly packed with money, dozens of jars. When they opened one with a can opener and poured the contents onto the table, one young militiaman whistled. "That's enough for a lifetime, and there'll be some left for the grandkids." Chain jewelry was found in the most unexpected places. Diamond rings in jars of grain, gold chains and old felt boots in the attic. The total sum seized shocked the investigators. More than 500,000 rubles in cash, and including the value of the goods, gold, furs, and antiques. Iron Bella's fortune was estimated at $1 million. Friends, just so you understand the scale, in 1982, a new Volga car cost about 15,000 rubles on the black market. A cooperative apartment in Moscow cost about 10,000. Bella was an underground millionaire. In a country where all were equal, she was 1,000 times more equal than others. Tell me honestly, what emotions does this search scene evoke in you? Envy, disgust, or maybe pity? After all, she hoarded all this for years, trembled over every kopeck, lived in fear, and in the end, it all turned into just inventory items that fit into a couple of boxes. Does such wealth which cannot be used openly even make sense? Write your thoughts. Bella was taken to a pre-trial detention center. She left her palace with her head held high. She still believed it was a misunderstanding. "I'll call Sergei Fyodorovich right now. I'll call the regional committee," she thought. She didn't know that the phones in her house had been tapped for a long time, that every word she spoke during interrogation would be used not only against her, but against her high-ranking patrons as well. In her cell, she demanded a meeting with the prosecutor. "You don't understand who you've taken," she screamed at the investigator. "I feed Central Committee secretaries. I know Medunov personally. If anything happens to me, heads will roll." The investigator, a young, calm Muscovite, looked at her over his glasses and quietly said, "That's exactly why we took you, Bella Naumovna. It's those heads we're after. You're just the key to the door." At that moment, Iron Bella felt something break inside her for the first time. The iron began to rust. She understood that they wouldn't save her. Moreover, she understood that she had become a dangerous witness. And in these kinds of games, witnesses aren't kept around for long. She was transferred to the Krasnodar pre-trial detention center. A series of exhausting interrogations began. The investigators were interested in only one thing. Who did she give money to? Who protected her? They needed names. And Bella began to talk. She gave up everyone. She told them who took how much to look the other way. She named district prosecutors, police chiefs, city committee secretaries. She thought cooperating with the investigation would save her life. She thought if she helped Moscow drown Medunov, her sentence would be reduced. "I'm a pawn!" she would cry during interrogations, losing her luster, turning into a frightened old woman. "I was forced. I was just following orders. I'm part of the system." But she was wrong. For Andropov, she wasn't a pawn. She was a symbol of the decay of the Brezhnev era, and this symbol had to be destroyed publicly, brutally, and irrevocably. Meanwhile, tectonic shifts were beginning in the country. In November of 1982, Leonid Brezhnev died. Yuri Andropov came to power. The screws began to turn with an audible crunch. A purge began in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Nikolai Shchelikov shot himself. Medunov was removed from his post. Although unlike Bella, he wasn't imprisoned, just quietly pensioned off. The system still protected its own, and Bella was left alone, face to face with the machinery of justice, which knew no mercy. She was not tried for theft. She was tried for living too well while the country was beginning to live poorly. The trial was closed. Bella was charged under Article 93, Subsection 1 of the RSFSR Criminal Code. Embezzlement of state property on an especially large scale. This article carried the death penalty, but it was usually applied to men. Women in the USSR were executed extremely rarely, only for monstrous murders or treason against the motherland. For economic crimes, women were never executed. Bella knew this. She was hoping for 15 years. She hoped to get out on parole. She made plans about how to hide the remaining valuables, but the verdict struck like a bolt from the blue. The judge, not looking at the defendant, monotonously read, "Sentenced to the supreme measure of punishment, death by firing squad." Silence fell in the courtroom. Bella didn't faint. She just froze. She couldn't believe her ears. "Execution," she whispered. "Me, a woman." Her lawyers immediately appealed. They wrote to every authority. They emphasized her age, her illnesses, the fact that she had cooperated with the investigation. But Moscow was relentless. The verdict was upheld. Bella was transferred to a death row cell in Novocherkassk. The countdown of her life began. Novocherkassk prison, a place spoken of only in whispers in the criminal underworld. They brought here those whose tickets were one way. Death row cells are not just four walls. They are a space where time flows differently. For Bella Borodkina, time stopped. In the first months after the verdict, she still held on. The instinct of the traitor, the habit of solving problems, lived in her. She wrote endless complaints, pleas for clemency. She wrote to the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. She wrote personally to Andropov. She offered the state a deal, her life in exchange for the hiding places she hadn't yet revealed. "I'll return every last kopeck," she wrote with a trembling hand. "I know where more gold is hidden. I know names in Moscow. Spare my life, and I will be useful." But the answer was silence. Mail from her cell only went one way, into KGB archives. No one was going to bargain with her. Her money had already been seized or divided, and her information was only needed as long as it helped sink Medonov's clan. Once the necessary testimony was obtained, once the compromising material on the party leadership was collected in a file, Bella turned from a valuable witness into a dangerous burden. She knew too much. She knew which Central Committee secretaries liked young boys and who took bribes in antiques. She knew the roots of the black cash funds. Leaving her alive, even in a strict regime colony, was too risky. What if she talked to journalists? What if the leadership changed and she started blackmailing the new masters? No. The system she had faithfully served made a cold, pragmatic decision. The witness must be silenced forever. While awaiting execution, something terrible began to happen to Bella. Her iron psyche, hardened by years of intrigue and theft, cracked. She began to lose her mind. It wasn't malingering, as criminals often do to play crazy. This was a genuine disintegration of personality. Prison guards, accustomed to everything, watched in horror as the former queen transformed. She stopped taking care of herself. The woman who wouldn't leave home without French perfume and a styled hairdress now went weeks, without washing. She tore at her hair. She talked to shadows on the wall. She thought she was back in her restaurant. "Lyudochka, bring the champagne," she would scream into the emptiness of her damp cell. "Sergei Fyodorovich has arrived. Set the table. Where's the caviar? Why is the tablecloth dirty? I'll kill you." Then the hallucinations would be replaced by fits of wild terror. She would crawl under the bunk and howl like a beaten dog. She begged the guards not to kill her. "I'll give you everything. Don't shoot. I want to live." Prison doctors examined her. The diagnosis was unequivocal. Reactive psychosis, schizophrenia. By law, the mentally ill cannot be executed. They must be treated. But Soviet law was flexible when political expediency was at stake. An unspoken order came from Moscow. Declare her sane. Psychiatrists, averting their eyes, wrote in their conclusions, "She is malingering. The system could not allow her to save herself in an insane asylum. They needed a dead witch, not a sick old woman. At this time, the final stage of the Sochi Krasnodar case was unfolding in the country. Thanks to the testimony of Bella and other arrested directors, heads were rolling. Hundreds of mid-level officials were arrested. Sergei Medunov himself, Bella's patron, was removed from his post, expelled from the party, and stripped of his awards. But he was not imprisoned. He was simply sent into retirement in Moscow, where he lived out his days in a comfortable apartment, receiving a personal pension. Feel the difference. Feel this monstrous cynicism. The man who created this system of corruption, who encouraged theft, who accepted suitcases of money, sits in an armchair watching television and drinking tea. The woman who carried him those suitcases, who was his tool, sits in a death row cell waiting for a bullet in the back of the head. Friends, I have a very difficult question for you. What do you think? Is this fair? Yes, Bella stole. Yes, she lived indecently. But does an economic crime deserve death? And why, in such stories, do the masterminds, the big bosses, always come out clean, while the executors pay with their lives? Write in the comments. Does the fight against corruption justify such cruelty? Bella's last days were hell. She aged 20 years in 1 year. She barely ate the prison slop. Her body rejected the food. She, accustomed to balik and sturgeon, now gnawed on stale bread and washed it down with tap water. She often remembered her childhood, hunger, poverty. Why? She would whisper at night, I just didn't want to be hungry. I just wanted to live like a human being. The irony of fate. She ran from hunger her whole life, stole millions so she would never be in need, and was dying in a cell, resembling a skeleton, denied even a bar of soap. Her daughter tried to get a visit. She was refused. Bella was not allowed to say goodbye to her family. She was isolated from the world like a plague victim. The authorities were afraid she would pass some information to the outside, some compromising material that hadn't been found during the search. Rumors circulated that somewhere there existed Bella's black notebook, containing all the bribes with dates and names. The KGB turned everything upside down, but the notebook was never found. Maybe she invented it to frighten her enemies? Or maybe that notebook still lies hidden in a cache, somewhere near Gelendzhik, keeping the secrets of the Soviet elite. August of 1983. The corridor of death. When they came for her, she didn't resist. She had no strength left. She didn't scream, didn't throw a fit. She was in a state of complete apathy. 2 sturdy guards took her by the arms. She could barely move her feet. They led her along the long basement corridors. Light bulbs flickered dimly. She knew this path. They had told her, in the name of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. She didn't listen to the verdict. She stared at the wall, upholstered in felt, to muffle the sound of gunshots. At the last moment, they say, her sanity returned. For a second, she raised her eyes to the prosecutor and said just one phrase, "Be damned, all of you, those who took and those who kill." A shot. Bella Borodkina's body fell to the concrete floor. A doctor confirmed death. Her body was not released to relatives for burial. That is the law for the executed. The burial place is kept secret. She was buried in an unmarked grave under a number in some prison cemetery. The queen who slept on silk sheets found peace in a dirty pit, sprinkled with quicklime. Thus ended the life of Iron Bella. But the story did not end there. Bella's death was a signal to the entire trading mafia of the USSR. The rules had changed. No one was protected anymore. Stealing the old way was no longer possible. But did they stop stealing? Of course not. The schemes just became more cunning, and the bribes larger. However, Bella's figure remained unique. She became the only woman the system demonstratively sacrificed to cleanse its ranks of filth. Years later, when archives were opened, historians and lawyers said in one voice, this sentence was monstrously disproportionate to the crime. Yes, embezzlement on an especially large scale. But execution was a political reprisal, an act of revenge. Revenge of a system that was afraid of its own reflection in the mirror. Bella was flesh of the system's flesh. She was its ugly, grotesque, but still its own child. And like Saturn devouring his sons, the Soviet power devoured Bella to survive itself. But there is another nuance few people know. During the investigation, it became clear that Bella didn't just steal. She, a woman with business acumen, was in fact attempting to introduce elements of a market economy into ossified socialism. She paid people for their work. She sought out the best suppliers. She created service where there was rudeness. If she had been born 20 years later, in the 90s, she would have become a legal millionaire, owner of a restaurant chain, a respected businesswoman. Her talent as an organizer was undeniable. She was simply born in the wrong time and the wrong country. Her talent became her crime. We have reached the finale of her personal drama, but the consequences of the Iron Bella case echoed for a long time. After her execution, a wave of suicides swept through the Union among store directors and trust managers. People, learning of Borodkina's fate, understood. The joke was over. They burned documents, threw jewelry into rivers, hanged themselves in their offices. Fear paralyzed the trading system. For a while, the counters became more honest, but the deficit did not disappear. After the echo of the shot in the Novocherkassk basement faded, and the body of Iron Bella was committed to an unnamed grave, a real gold rush began in Gelendzhik. The city buzzed. People whispered in their kitchens. Taxi drivers told legends to passengers, and local boys dug up the surrounding forests in search of treasure. Why? Because the math didn't add up. The investigation officially seized valuables and cash from Bella, totaling about 1 million rubles. According to other data, 500,000. The figures in the protocols varied, a huge sum, but everyone understood. This was just the tip of the iceberg. Bella had reigned for almost 10 years. Such sums passed through her hands that she could have made 1 million in a year. Where was the rest? Where were those millions she hinted at from her death row cell? I didn't. Give everything back, she screamed at investigators in moments of despair. I have hiding places. I'll buy my life. But they didn't let her show them, or someone didn't want those hiding places to be found officially. There is a persistent legend, believed by many old-timers in Gelendzhik. They say that shortly before her arrest, sensing the clouds gathering, Bella removed several heavy chests or milk churns from her house. On a dark night, without witnesses, she buried them somewhere in the mountains in the area of the Markoch Ridge. Gold, diamonds, foreign currency. The KGB turned her house upside down. They pried up floors, tapped walls, even scanned the garden with metal detectors. But the main prize was never found. Perhaps these treasures still lie there, in the rocky soil, awaiting their time. Or perhaps they were found by those who arrested Bella. In the 90s, persistent rumors circulated that some of the operatives who worked on the octopus case suddenly became rich, left the service, and started big businesses. Coincidence or the price of silence? But Bella's most valuable treasure was not diamonds, it was information. The legend of the Black Notebook still haunts researchers. Bella was pedantic. She kept records. Unlike ordinary thieves, she wrote down everything. Who, how much, when, and for what service. It was her insurance policy, her nuclear briefcase. In this notebook, according to rumors, were the names of people who, in the 80s, sat in the Kremlin, ran ministries, wore generals' epaulets. If that notebook had surfaced at the trial, the defendant's doc would have had to hold half the CPSU Central Committee. It would have been a political explosion capable of destroying the very reputation of Soviet power. That is why Bella was executed so quickly. That is why all her pleas for clemency were denied. She had to be silenced. And the notebook? The notebook was most likely found, but it never made it into the criminal case files. Such evidence is not filed away in folders. It is either burned in Lubyanka's furnaces or placed in the personal safe of the KGB chairman, as a tool of influence. Andropov was a clever man. Compromising material on the party elite was not needed for court. It was needed for power. Bella became a pawn in a big game. And when she had played her role, collected the compromising material, she was removed from the board. And what about the family? Money earned through deceit and theft rarely brings happiness to heirs. The story of Bella's daughter is tragic proof of that. Bella had a daughter she loved madly. Everything Iron Bella did, she did for her. So her little girl would never lack anything, would live like a princess. And her daughter did live like a princess. The best clothes, prestigious education, no worries. Mother solved any problem with one phone call. But when Mother was arrested, the fairy tale turned into horror. Imagine the state of a young woman, accustomed to luxury and universal respect, suddenly becoming the daughter of an enemy of the people, the daughter of an executed thief. Her property was confiscated, her friends turned away. Neighbors who once bowed low now spat after her. The daughter bore the mark of Cain. She had to go through the hell of interrogations. Investigators pressured her to reveal her mother's hiding places. Where's the gold? Where did your mother hide the stones? Talk, or you'll follow her as an accomplice. She either didn't know or didn't tell. This woman's life was shattered. Bella's cursed money brought her not happiness, but shame, fear, and loneliness. They say she lived modestly to the end of her days, trying not to attract attention, and flinched at every knock on the door. Her mother's legacy became a heavy cross for her, not a golden parachute. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, at those Bella fed. Sergei Fyodorovich Medunov, the master of the region, the man who created the system in which Bella thrived. What became of him after his removal and expulsion from the party? He lived in Moscow. Yes, he lost power. Yes, he endured humiliation. But he remained alive. He lived in a good apartment, received a pension, wrote his memoirs in which he justified himself, claiming he was a victim of Andropov's intrigues. He died in 1999, in his own bed, a very old man. He was not shot. He was not left to rot in a cellar. Do you feel the difference? The switchwoman was killed. The trainmaster was simply sent into honorable retirement. This injustice is the main leitmotif of the Borodkina case. Bella was no angel, she was a criminal. But she was a product of her time and her environment. She played by rules she didn't invent. Steal but share. Feed us, and we'll cover for you. She fulfilled her part of the bargain. They did not. When the heat was on, the system simply spat her out like a cherry pit. Friends, what do you think? Why does this happen so often in history? The big bosses come out clean, while the foot soldiers bear the harshest punishment. Is there some cruel logic of power in this, or is it just an accident? Write what you think about this selective justice. There is another mystical aspect to this story. Locals in Gelendzhik say the site where Bella's restaurant stood is cursed. Business there never thrives. Owners change, go bankrupt, fires occur, as if Iron Bella's soul still wanders there among the shadows of the past, counting the takings and demanding reports. She loved her restaurants, her power, her gold so much that perhaps part of her energy, heavy, domineering, insatiable, remains within those walls. But the most astonishing thing happened later. Just a few years after her execution came 1985, perestroika, then the 90s, and everything for which Bella was shot suddenly became normal. Private restaurants? Please. Trading in scarce goods? It's called business. Currency exchange? Every kiosk had an exchanger. Extravagant living? Just look at the new Russians in their raspberry blazers. Bella was ahead of her time. If she had lived into the 90s, she would have become the queen of New Russia. A respected entrepreneur, a philanthropist. She would have appeared on television as an example of a successful woman who made herself. The article under which she was killed disappeared from the criminal code. Embezzlement was no longer punished by death. So, she was killed for something that became legal 10 years later. This thought lends Bella's story the hue of an ancient Greek tragedy. She perished at the turn of eras, caught in the millstones of history that grind fates indiscriminately. In 1983, when the shot was fired, it seemed that Soviet power, having punished corruption, would become stronger. That theft would cease. But we know what happened next. The system that killed Bella collapsed 8 years later, rotten from within, because you cannot build an honest society by executing one thief while leaving in power those who created the conditions for theft. When the smoke from the shot in the Novocherkassk basement cleared, and Bella Borodkina's case was filed away in the KGB's special archives with the stamp, "Keep." Forever, the Soviet Union continued its life. But it was already a different life. Bella's death became an invisible boundary. It marked the end of the era of golden stagnation, the era of the party bigwig's beautiful life, caviar and diamonds. Ahead, the country faced perestroika, sugar ration coupons, the collapse of the empire, and the wild 90s. Bella Borodkina became the last victim of the old world and the first martyr of the new. Today, decades later, when we look at this story with a cold eye, Bella's figure evokes not so much hatred as a complex feeling, mixed with pity and bewilderment. Yes, she was a criminal. She stole, she cheated, she corrupted people with money. No one is going to make a saint of her. But let's be honest. She was a brilliant organizer. In the conditions of a planned economy, when you couldn't even buy a nail without a voucher, she managed to feed thousands of people delicacies. She found food where there was none. She built logistics chains that worked more efficiently than Gosplan. Her tragedy is that her talent was directed not at creation, but at survival and enrichment in a distorted coordinate system. Soviet power itself created the conditions where working honestly was unprofitable, and stealing was dangerous, but profitable. And Bella simply accepted these rules of the game. She played with passion, for high stakes, with grandeur. She was the best player at that table. But she forgot the cardinal rule of the casino. The house always wins. And in her case, the house was the state. When the croupier decided the player had won too much and had become a nuisance, he was simply taken out back and shot. Bella Borodkina's death is a lesson to all who think that proximity to power guarantees safety. She fed them from her hand. She knew their wives and children. She considered them friends. But for them, she was merely service staff, gilded, useful, but still service staff. And you don't feel sorry for the help. When a sacrificial offering was needed on the altar of the fight against corruption, to pacify the people and show Andropov's iron fist, the choice fell on her without hesitation. Why? Because she was the perfect scapegoat. A Jewish woman, wealthy, arrogant. The people hated her. Her death evoked not sympathy, but gloating. Serves the thief right. The authorities knew what they were doing. No one took to the streets with posters saying "Free Bella." But look at the paradox of history. Only a few years passed after her execution, and the very people who judged her, who wrote angry articles in Pravda and Izvestia, suddenly started doing the same thing. In the 90s, former Komsomol leaders became bankers. Former factory directors privatized enterprises. The schemes for which Bella was put against the wall, barter, speculation, off-the-books work, became the foundation of the new economy. If Bella could have seen the future from her death row cell, she would probably have gone mad a second time with laughter. Bitter, hysterical laughter at the absurdity of it all. She was killed for a false start. She ran towards capitalism before the starting pistol fired. Today in Gelendzhik, little remains to remind one of Iron Bella. Her restaurants have been rebuilt or demolished. Her house, that very palace where they ripped up floors during the search, has long been sold and resold. But the legend lives on. Tour guides tell tourists tales of Borodkina's buried treasures, of her ghost wandering the embankment in a white fur coat. She has become part of the city's mythology, its dark genius. But there is one more, most important aspect of this story. Moral. Money. Huge, easy money, for which she lived and for which she died. Did it bring her happiness? We saw her rise, luxurious receptions, the respect of ministers, power. But we also saw her fall. Fear, loneliness, madness in her cell, the betrayal of all she thought were close. Was that beautiful life worth that ending in a damp basement? Were the diamonds in the pickle jars worth her daughter carrying the stigma of an outcast her entire life? The answer seems obvious, but every time we hear news about another colonel billionaire, in whose home they find rooms stuffed with cash, we realize Bella's story teaches no one nothing. People keep stepping on the same rake. The lust for gain switches off the instinct for self-preservation. The glitter of gold blinds so completely that a person stops seeing the execution wall towards which he is sprinting at full speed. Bella Borodkina remains in history as a symbol of an era when rot was hidden under a coat of varnish, and theft was called knowing how to live. Her execution was a cruel act, barbaric. The state murder of an elderly woman does not honor that state. But that shot didn't just end her life. It became an epitaph to the entire Soviet project, which by that point was terminally ill with the same disease as Bella, double morality. On the rostrum, they spoke of equality and brotherhood, while in closed distributors they divided caviar and finished servalat sausage. Bella was simply a mirror, a distorted, magnifying but honest mirror of the system. And that mirror enraged the system. It smashed it with a pistol shot. But as we know, breaking a mirror is bad luck. 8 years later, the country was gone. Friends, we are concluding our investigation. This was a difficult story. A story of glitter and poverty, power and powerlessness. I want to ask you one final question. Today, in the 21st century, no one is executed for economic crimes. At most, you get a sentence, and often a suspended one, if you have good lawyers. What do you think? Is that right? Is humanity a sign of civilization? Or perhaps it is the fear of the ultimate punishment that could stop today's corrupt officials, who steal billions and fear nothing. Do we need a return to harsh measures, like under Andropov? Or is human life more important than any amount of stolen money? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's discuss. This is a sharp topic, and there can be no single opinion. We have told you the truth about Iron Bella, about the woman who wanted to be queen, but became a pawn in someone else's game, about the woman the entire union searched for, first to eat at her establishments, and then to kill her. If this video made you think, if you learned something new about our country's history, please support us. Like this video. It helps the video reach new viewers. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. We have many investigations ahead. We will delve into KGB archives, tell you about secret maniacs of the USSR, about the Diamond Mafia, and about heroes who have been forgotten. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the true price of money sometimes turns out to be too high. Life is the one thing that cannot be bought. See you soon.